Well, today she announces plans to trigger Article 50 by the end of March next year. But on the issue that seems to split her party, the country's future trading relationship with Europe, still no decision, no indication. Well, the former Conservative leader and former Work and Pension Secretary, of course, Iain Duncan Smith, is at the party's conference in Birmingham and joins me now. And a very good morning to you, Mr. Duncan Smith. Well, we've just had it from the Prime Minister. Let's start with Article 50. Will be triggered by the end of March. Same question I put to Priti Patel, though. I mean, do you take the view that, given the EU say they won't negotiate with the UK until Article 50 is triggered, what's there to wait for? Why not do it now?
Well, I think it's fairly reasonable. She said a while back, actually, she said she'd be doing it by the early part of the new year. I think this fits that. And by the way, this is a by the end of March, so there's every chance she'll be triggering it earlier than that. So it depends hugely, I think, on what they're doing at the moment behind the scenes, trying to make sure that they have exactly the areas that they want lined up, such as trading arrangements, free trade, how to do the 72 bit, which he released today, which is repeal of the 1972 European Communities Act. By the way, that was one of the things we recommended in the paper yesterday, is they start that process and conclude it literally the moment we leave. So all of that's one element of what we said is now in, and the rest is now about how do you sort out other arrangements. For example, there are some issues that will require some discussion, like competition law and things, which will need to be tidied up, whatever our final relationship with them is. So these are the things they need to get sorted and straight, so that when they do Article 50, it means we proceed, and I hope and believe quickly, to the exit door and out well within the 2-year period.
Yeah, but as you know, it's already been 3 months, and you yourself said that by the end of March, so there's a window to do it whenever she likes. Some think she should?
Well, again, it's over to the Prime Minister. I mean, you know, let's put this in perspective. The British people voted in June to leave the European Union. It's a very strong vote, very clear message. There are some very clear red lines in there. There's no question about what they voted on, in the sense that they voted to take back control. 3 key areas. One was borders, the other was our laws, and the third area was our money. And so in that context, I think she's only too well aware that she has to shape what she does in Article 50 around that very clear message it was sent by the British people. So to do that, I think it's worth spending just a little bit of time. After all, this is arguably the single biggest process that's been undertaken by a government in external terms since probably entering the European Union in the first place.
And as you mentioned there, your recommendation from your grouping just yesterday about this Great Repeal Bill Act that's now been referred to, the 72 Act that paved the way for Britain to enter
That's right,
the then common market. Didn't your paper more or less say, though, well, do it, repeal it all now? This seems to be put it on the statute book, park it, leave, then start unpicking the acts.
No, what we actually recommended, if you read the paper quite carefully, you'll see Bill Cash himself, who's a constitutional expert as a lawyer, he said that what you do is you start the process to repeal the 72 Act. Now, you can't actually repeal it, because when you repeal it and enact it and it becomes law, you have de facto left the European Union. So it has to run in conjunction with the other discussions that run under Article 50, because the Article 50 is our international obligations, and the 72 Act is what we have to do for domestic law. So you run those in parallel. She's absolutely right that at the key moment at the end, as and when we leave, that becomes law. So in other words, all of the repeal takes place, bang, when it's done. So that's fine. Within all of that, though, you can process many of those arguments and debates that will take place. So this nonsense that the courts are saying, oh, well, maybe, you know, Parliament needs to be told that they have to have a vote, that is patently ridiculous, because the 72 Act will now go through. And so all of that is very clear. What then becomes the issue is then what do you do about our relationship after we leave? And that's the key area where we recommended further that you don't get bogged down in detailed discussions about being members of the European single market, when it's quite patently obvious that the European Union is simply not going to be prepared to let us stay as members of the single market, because we have a red line over our border controls and over laws. So in other words, we can't be half in and half out. We have to be out, but we want a good relationship with them after.
Yeah. But then, as you also point out there on that very process, that we have the safety net, in your estimation, when it comes to trade, of World Trade Organization rules and free trade. But as you know, motor manufacturers in particular last week have been saying, well, we're worried about that. Even under WTO rules, we could face tariffs of up to 10%. And even if they're smaller than that, we're on wafer-thin margins. That damages our investment decisions.
Well, motor manufacturers are already 12% better off than they were before we voted to leave, because the pound's level has given them a 12% advantage. And the absolute limit of a WTO tariff, as set globally, is 10% for manufacturers of cars. And so, first of all, the idea that somehow this is a one-way street is wrong. I think they're wrong to believe that somehow they're protected in the single market. Single market is not really a free market. It's a very managed market with very heavy levels of regulation that all of British industry, whether or not you export, all of it has to comply, and only about 10% of British
Mr. Duncan Smith,
industry
the reality,
exports.
you're telling them, sorry to interrupt, but the reality is, wrong or not, Nissan is saying they might not build the new Qashqai in Sunderland. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, well, the reality is what works for them economically, and let's get this absolutely straight. I do not believe in any shape or form that they are in any way likely to be affected adversely for this, for two very good reasons. The first is that what we're talking about here is you be very clear to the European Union. You want to have a free trade arrangement with them, not as members of the single market. Now, of course, you're asking for something which is in their interests, because the European Union exports more in cars and goods than we do to the European Union. So any kind of tariff issue is going to be destructive to them, doubly so because the pound is now lower, which means their goods are even less competitive here in the UK. So when I was talking to German businessmen quite recently, to Swiss negotiators, etc., they all said, look, don't go to be members of the single market because that becomes politically impossible. But what we do want to do, and what we will put pressure on our governments to do, is to ensure that we do not have tariff barriers, that we reach an agreement to set a free trade area which you will be part of. Now that is common sense, and that's what they want and what we want. So the key to the negotiation is not trying to have special pleading with the EU, but the key point is to actually negotiate and discuss with them on things that they also want. And they want to have clear access to the UK markets, best market for Germany in cars from the whole of the world. So do we. And that's where you now have a meeting of minds once it starts.
Last thought on welfare reform and your legacy on it. Damien Green now in your old post. They're saying there's a change in tone and has scrapped repeat medical assessments. Do you think he's right to do that? Do you welcome that?
I do welcome it because it's, in fact, what he may not have said, but what is clear is that over a year ago, I set a programme and a policy for full reform and change, which the problem with the present sickness benefit is you're either too sick to work or you can work, but there are lots of progressive elements in the middle. What we had was a reform structure on the table that should come through in the autumn, which would change all of that, part of which was to say if you medicalise some of these conditions like Parkinson's, etc., that means you can let people work for a period, but as it progressively gets worse, then you recognise that they will actually fall away from work. What he's doing is implementing that, and I am fully in favour of that. That's the right and most decent thing to do.